All right, so today we have on the show Susan Dyer, who works with ERS in their practice around EOS. And we want to talk about the entrepreneur operating system today, because if you're in the roofing industry and you're a roofing contractor, you got to have an operating system. You have to have some method of operating of how you run your business. And EOS has been one that has truly, I think, Susan, in the last 10 years or so, taken the business world by storm, because it's a great system, right? It provides you all of the things that you need to run a successful business. So Susan, welcome to the show, first and foremost.
Thank you, Derrick.
It's great to see you as always. Tell us a little bit about what is EOS and how does it, the book Traction is what it's really originally based on, right? But tell us a little bit about what is the EOS system.
Okay, well, first of all, it's not software. I feel like everybody hears operating system and they think software. It's not. It's a collection of management tools that encompass your entire company and everything that's happening in your company, and just help you run a better business. It really helps you achieve three things that we call vision, traction, and health. So vision from the standpoint of first crystallizing your leaders around where the company's headed and how it's going to get there. Traction from a standpoint of introducing a lot more discipline and accountability starting at the leadership team level. And then finally, health, meaning that our strong leaders are finally learning how to work together as a team and being able to call each other out, hold each other accountable, and just speak the truth about the hard things that have to be spoken about. Once we get all those three things at the leadership team level, then we're ready to push it down into the organization. And what happens is that we get a common way of doing our business. We get a common way of talking, kind of the same language that we're all speaking. Everybody's rowing in the same direction. Everybody understands what the expectations are of them. And everybody has a method for getting their roadblocks and issues solved so that they can be successful.
Makes sense. And I think accountability is one of those things that we cringe a little bit when we hear it. Nobody truly wants to be held accountable, but it is one of those things that once you do put that rigor in motion, you look back at it and you say, yeah, we sort of needed that.
Absolutely.
And I love that it is the word entrepreneur is in it as well, because many times those are the ones who really do need that discipline, because we are visionaries and we're out there. Maybe we're in the work and we're actually physically doing the work on a daily basis. Maybe we were the visionary. Maybe the processes are all in our head and we sort of assume that people know what we want them to do. But we've got to be able to actually cast that vision out there. And then I use the example of Santa Claus, right? Nobody hates Santa Claus, right? But he does hold us accountable to our actions, particularly the month of December, right? When we're kids, we're thinking about Santa Claus and going, well, he sees when you're sleeping, knows when you're awake, knows if you've been bad or good. I mean, that sounds like EOS.
It is like EOS, but you know what? Santa Claus only does a check-in with you once a year.
Well, that's true.
EOS, you get to check in every week. So there's not this, oh, darn it moment where you're racing at the end of the year hoping Santa's going to be nice to you. Every week we have to kind of pull up our big kid pants and be responsible and accountable for the things that we're working on.
So we can't just be good girls and boys in December. We have to do it all year round. So let's talk about some of those tools and where do companies get started and what are the benefits that they see out of EOS once they've gotten that into that routine?
Sure. Well, when we start with EOS, the first thing we do is we teach the 5 foundational tools, which is hitting the ceiling and what that means. And even an issue can be hitting the ceiling and how you break through that ceiling every time. Because most of these companies that come to us are at a serious inflection point. What was working before isn't working anymore and they feel stuck. So we talk about that. The second thing we do is we roll up our sleeves and we create an accountability chart, which is sort of like an org chart, only we don't have titles. We don't want to introduce ego. And we're also identifying the 5 major themes, the 5 major responsibilities for every seat within the organization, so that we can start to hold people accountable towards that. After that, we assign rocks, and rocks are 90-day projects. They have a beginning, they have an end, and they have a set deliverable. And these are typically things that really need to get done in the business, and we forget about them because we're so busy with day job and putting out client fires. After that, We work on the scorecard so that we can measure efficacy in everybody's seat, making sure that for those 5 things that we've identified that they're accountable for, how do we know? How do we know if they're actually being accountable for them? If we have processes, can we measure them so that we can make sure that the processes are being followed and adhered to? And then finally, I call this one the Mac Daddy out of all the tools. We teach them what we call the level 10 meeting. And the level 10 meeting is something that we hold once a week. It's always on the same day at the same time. It's 90 minutes long. We follow the same agenda. And in there, we're checking in. How are we doing with our scorecard, right? Are we running a great business? How are we doing with our rocks? Are we pushing ourselves forward, heading towards our vision? How are we doing with our customers and employees? Are they happy? Is there anything that we need to be doing there? Right there in the beginning of the meeting, we're actively mining for issues. We're looking for issues so that we can spend the next 60 minutes solving them, standing them up, getting to the root, solving them and making them go away forever. Because I don't know about you, Derrick, but have you ever worked in a company where you talk about the same meetings week after week after week?
I mean, it's just, you can tell an EOS company versus other companies because they are really good at this. And I think there's a couple of key elements that I've seen over the years. One in particular, and it's an aspect of accountability, and that is the level 10. Because I think what happens a lot of times is we commit to doing things for a month or a quarter or a year, and we say, here's all the great stuff we're going to do, and we write the plan. And then, 364 days later, we know that the assignment is due tomorrow. And that's what we did in college. It's what we all do, right? It's the night before. We work through the night to try to get it done. And that's a real mistake, because not only do you get an aspect of accountability when you have to go and report and do the little show and tell every week, but you also have an opportunity to adjust. And what I mean by that is, we've all probably been in situations like this where we tell somebody, hey, look, we need you to contact this customer and resolve their issue. And we need you to do it by Friday at 5:00. And then at 4:30, the person comes to us and says, oh, wait, the issue isn't what we thought. And now all of a sudden we're scrambling and we become firefighters, right? We're out there trying to put out these fires. But instead, if you have that check-in with that person, that they can come to you halfway through that project and say, hey, I did call Susan, and it's actually not what we think. It's a different problem. How would you like me to address this differently? We all know that happens all the time. When we identify a problem, rarely is it the actual problem. We have to get to that root cause. And I think that's what the level 10 really allows us to do.
It does. I tell my clients all the time that if you don't dig to the root cause of the problem, you're going to solve the symptom. And here's what happens when we solve the symptom. It shows up again with a new face on it, right? So if we take care of one client and we don't get to the root and we don't fix the problem there, it's just going to happen to another client. And they're just going to show up just as mad as the first one. So.
You're so right. That's why, there's a lesson in Japanese management. It's actually the first lesson that you learn in Japanese management school. And it really is cringeworthy for American CEOs, Western CEOs, because it says that human beings cannot make a mistake. If a mistake has occurred, it's a result of a system or process you have implemented incorrectly. Now, that is tricky because we've all had problem employees, and we know that scenario is not always 100% true. But if you take that worldview and you say, look, if I had actually set up the system and process and put in the accountability and the responsibilities, and I had done all these things correctly, my people couldn't make those type of errors. And I would have improved the process. I would have improved the system so that they couldn't make those errors. When we see a fire imagine for a minute, Susan, that once a day, an electrical fire broke out in your house. Eventually you would hire an electrician to come in and say, let's stop calling the fire department and let's actually figure out what's wrong with our electrical. But yet in our businesses, we allow this to happen all the time. It's like, I get really perturbed when I hear CEOs tell me, oh, I've got fires I've got to fight. And I'm like, have you ever fought those fires before? Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's the same fire we've been fighting for 3 years. Put it out already. Like, get to the bottom of what's causing this fire and find a way to solve it. And that's what I love about EOS, is I really do feel like it gives you a system in order to approach those type of problems.
It absolutely does. And one of the things that we really try to emphasize within EOS is that there's 6 key components in any organization. So there's the vision component, the people component, the scorecard or the data component. There's an issues component. There's a process component, and then there's a traction or execution component. And when we're solving issues and looking for the root cause, it's in one of those 5 other components. Okay, it's not the issues component unless you're not getting to root cause, and then that in itself is an issue. But if you look there, you're going to find out it's a people problem. It's a data problem. It's a process problem that needs to be tweaked. It's something's wrong with our vision, or people are just not executing. They're not getting a clear idea of what they need to execute on. So it always comes back to those components. And so you're right. It really isn't the people unless we actually have.
It can't happen, right? I mean, I've been a problem once in a while in my life, so I know, right? But I think if you take that approach, that whatever the problem is, I want to solve it at its root so that it never rears its ugly head here again. I actually challenged a customer years ago. I said, I want you to put a sign on your wall that says number of days without a fire. And I want you to know what that means. I'm not talking about a fire, a physical fire, and because it's usually 0.
Yeah.
You know, we've never gotten to 1 before. And once we get to 1, let's celebrate 1. And then let's see if we can get on a little bit of a hot streak here of 2 or 3 or 4. And when you find that you're on that streak, the reason is because you've actually gone back and done the work to find the root causes of these things, to figure out where the problems are in your organization and solve them. And so many times we just don't get there because we're too busy. I think that's what I've always liked about EOS. I'm a firm believer that, you know, what gets measured gets managed, right? This is a common concept in business. So many entrepreneurial companies never really get into the measurement piece. They don't have an operating system. They don't have a way that they approach it. And candidly, just starting the measurement process, just doing the motions and having the meetings, you'll see progress in your company just because you're paying attention to those things that you weren't paying attention to before.
You know, Derrick, I tell people when I teach the level 10 meeting and I teach IDS, it seems very overwhelming and it's hard to do. And I always promise them by the 3rd meeting, so 3 months into the process, I said, I promise you, when I ask you what's working in your business, you're going to tell me the level 10 meetings are working. And invariably, on session 3, they come in and they go, wow, those level 10 meetings are working. And I always say, I told you.
The complaints do tend to fall off. And I, as you know, I work with a lot of companies that work with EOS as well. And I get those managers that tell me that. They're like, this is I can't believe we're going to do this every week. Why do we have to do it every week? And then eventually they just sort of, their voice is silenced because they see the progress. And I think they also understand too, which is really important inside your business. And it's hard to recognize yourself, but holding people accountable is really, really important. I like to say that if everybody's responsible and nobody's accountable, you're going to have problems. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I just ask all of my employees and said, hey folks, can we keep the restrooms clean? I guarantee you we will have a biohazard team in here in 2 weeks trying to clean it up, right? Because nobody's accountable. When I know the old adage, and some people don't like this anymore, is the throat to choke, right? It's like, who am I going to go after when this problem happens? And that level of accountability and bringing that to that L10, let's be honest, in a lot of senses, it's show and tell. It's just like it was in 2nd grade. Here's my project. Here's how it's going. But you got to stand in front of everybody else and you have to be accountable. And what does tend to happen, and I don't know how often you've seen this, but I see it on my end, that managers move out of the business voluntarily because they realize they might not be as big a shot as they have a good mouth, but they don't have a good set of hands to get things done.
They do, especially initially when all of a sudden the stakes have changed. And they're going to be held accountable, and it starts scaring people. And so it happens at the leadership team level all the way down when they recognize, oh, you're serious and you're not going to just do EOS for a week or 2. You will see some people exiting, and usually by the time they exit, the rest of the company goes, wow, that's actually a good thing.
I cannot tell you how many times I have seen people leave an organization and everybody says, oh, we're going to have to take on all this extra workload. And 2 weeks later, they're like, well, wait a second. Now there's less workload because we were fighting fires all the time that were a result of that person's actions and behaviors or inability to be accountable, or their blame on other people. So it really does make you have a very healthy organization. Let's talk about results a little bit, because I do think, the folks that are listening to this, there's some tools that they can look for, including the traction book, which I don't, people give me copies of it all the time. And I'm like, I already have like 10 of them floating around the house, earmarked, and dog-eared. But let's talk a little bit about that. Where do you get started in the EOS journey?
Well, there's several different ways. Number one is to pick up traction, and you can begin implementing it yourself. If you go on the EOS Worldwide site, you can download a bunch of free tools that they use, and you can begin to use them yourself. There's also working with an implementer like me. So if I were to say, hey, I want to become a pro golfer, I'm going to go out and start hitting some balls. That's one way to do it. Might take you a long time to figure those things out. Or you can hire a coach. And so that's what an implementer brings to the table. They just are good at facilitating and calling out the problems. And it's really nice to have an impartial party up there running the meeting so everybody can participate.
Yeah. And I think it's true too, that it's nice to have a coach because it holds you accountable as the entrepreneur. This is one of the things that gets tricky with accountability is people, CEOs in particular, or leaders of a company are like, we want to hold people accountable. And we have to remind them that does have to start with you. And it's difficult to hold yourself accountable, right? So having a coach, having somebody that can call you out and say, hey, look, you said you were going to do these things and you need to take care of them. You need to truly lead by example. And by leading by example, you're going to see those type of results.
Derrick, let me tell you a story about that.
Please.
When I've been working with Elite Roofing Supply for 5 years. Yeah. It started with the leadership team not getting, 5, 6 rocks done, to all of HQ or headquarters. I think they had 53 rocks the last time we met, and guess how many were completed?
Oh, tell me it's 40 or more.
53.
Oh my goodness.
53. Yep. So I share that story with my other clients too when they're not getting their rocks done. I'm like, oh, you will get there.
Well, yeah, you'll get there. And I do think that one of the things that you really do need in a business is that scorecard that you mentioned too. When you judge your success and failure by your balance sheet, sometimes that can be really tricky because not everything is accurately depicted there, right? That's a very short snapshot. So sometimes it's really nice to have a scoreboard that tells you if you're winning or losing the game. Could you imagine if we were to play football or hockey or baseball or anything else without a scoreboard, and you just sort of keep track in your head of how you think we're doing? That just wouldn't work. So you've got to have those kind of things in your business, particularly as you grow and get bigger.
We call that flying blind. I don't think you'd want to be in an airplane and not have an instrument panel in front of you. So the thing about the scoreboard that EOS uses is that it's not a monthly or quarterly look back on how do we do. That's
right.
late, right? Those are lagging indicators. Well, we had a bad month. Now we've got to try to make it up. And now you're trying to double your revenue or whatever it is that you need to do in the next month. And you continually fall behind, you get demotivated. It's a vicious cycle that happens. And so instead, we build our scorecard off of weekly leading indicators. These are operational metrics that have a financial outcome. And sometimes it's hard for the team to think that way. So we have a process of getting them to a point where they understand it's not, I want to have $50,000 worth of sales out of this person in 1 week. We work ourselves backwards in that process, and we say, actually, how many proposals would need to go out to get to that 50,000? Let's track there so that we can get all over it when those proposals are low.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think the leading indicator piece is so important because if you do rely upon financials to tell you your health, it's essentially an autopsy is all you're really performing.
Right.
And, patients, It's not good when they're performing an autopsy on you. At that point, it's a little bit too late. It's much better to have that EKG that tells you what's happening right now or what's happened in the recent, history, that helps you and helps guide you to make the right decisions. So many times, particularly big companies, and I came from a background of doing some consulting for big organizations, and it was like the board would get together at the end of the quarter and look at the financials and say, oh, we have to do something. And then it would take them 2 or 3 months to plan what they were going to do, and then 3 months to implement it. And by the time we're talking about, do we have a solution for the problem, it's a year later. And it would have been much easier to actually been able to look at the speedometer and odometer and realize what was going on right at that moment. And being, to your point, being nimble, but being nimble in a very deliberate way, right? Not just as a cover up for not wanting to be accountable, but being nimble in a way where you have the data that you're in control of. On top of that, how much better do you sleep at night when you know where you stand? I think as a business owner and someone who's owned many businesses, the middle of the night is the worst time for you, because that's when you wake up and you can't fall back asleep because you're like, I wonder how we're doing. I wonder if this is getting taken care of. I wonder if Susan's actually doing what I asked her to do. That's really scary. It's way better to know, because when you know, you can react. You can't work historically or forensically and try to adjust the company.
And when you know, they know you know.
That's a good point too. Yeah, and I think that happens so many times where companies get into a situation where somebody's underperforming and it takes them a year to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's, I think you see that a lot, what's happening in Silicon Valley right now with a lot of the cutbacks and layoffs for companies. And you read some of the things that the CEOs are saying. And I was reading a statement from a CEO from back in October who said that, 96% of our sales are coming from 50% of our salespeople. Well, look, they just laid off some salespeople. And I'm thinking, November, December, like, what were you doing the last 90 days? If you knew they weren't performing, how did it take that long to get through that process? But I think you're right. Those leading indicators really are what we need to know what we need to do. And I think if you think about it from a general on the battlefield, we want intelligence. And you need to have that same type of intelligence in your business of what's happening right now, not what happened 2 weeks ago. History is for the history books. It's not for the boardroom.
I'm going to add on to your salespeople example. I read a statistic not too long ago that the cost of having a wrong person in the wrong seat where they're not producing, and 9 times out of 10, they're irritating other employees as well, can be up to 6.75 times their annual salary.
Wow. I believe that, because it does do damage. I love the Gallup study that comes out every year that talks about the level of engagement among employees. And what you find is that only about 15% of employees are highly engaged. About 15% of employees are detrimental. They're literally making things worse, to your point. But what we should be thinking about is that 70% in the middle that is not completely sure what their job is or what success looks like. Because the truth of the matter is that the folks down at the bottom, they're zombies. And what do zombies eat? I mean, we've all seen The Walking Dead. They go for the brains first, right? That's what they're trying to drain from your organization. So if you're not actively managing that and seeing that in real time, you're letting the zombies loose on that 70%. Your top performers will always be there. Like, they'll do their thing. And hopefully you don't push them out the door because you haven't held people accountable. But I always remind CEOs, zombies eat brains. If you've got people that are underperforming, you got to move them out of the way, because it's not just their work that's being harmed. It's everybody else. And it hurts the top performers too. Let me tell you, I was a top sales rep for a big telecommunications company many, many years ago. And, the underperformers aggravated me more than anything, because I'm like, how does this person still have a job? Like, I'm producing 20 times what they are. Why are we tolerating this in the company? And it can be really detrimental to the whole organization.
Your people are your engine. And so if you have a finely tuned engine, you have the opportunity to knock your competitors, way out of the ballpark and pick up on everything. So the other piece of that is employees like to win. And so when employees feel like they're winning and that they're being set up for success, your engine, gets tuned up all by itself. You're just holding them accountable and being very clear in your expectations, and then get out of the way. Let them do what they need to do. Yeah.
Susan, this was great. If folks want to find out more about EOS or about you, how do they do that?
Well, you can go to the website, which is www.eosworldwide.com. There's tons of information there. I do have a microsite on there, so if you click on implementers, you can find me there, or you can always just email me at susan.dyer, that's D-Y-E-R, at eosworldwide.com.
Well, I would encourage every roofer out there that's listening to this really to look into EOS. It's an off-the-shelf operating system that really will help you get started in creating success inside your business. And I think as we all know that the market is not what it was a year ago. Now's the time to really buckle down, bring accountability into your organization, start tracking, start doing all of the things that you should have been doing all along. But when the pickings were easy, it was easy to ignore. So thank you all for joining us. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.